Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be sharing my time with the member from Yukon today. I'd like to start today, Mr. Speaker, by speaking directly to the seriousness of these allegations, the seriousness of foreign interference, generally speaking, and what the government has been doing. There is, to the member who spoke just before me, the claim that we've done nothing is absolutely ludicrous. I will remind that member that on December 18th of 2020, the then Minister of Public Safety mailed a copy of a public report regarding election interference, specifically as it relates to China, to every single member in this House of Commons. I'm sure that she received that, reviewed that, as did all Conservative MPs. Yet they have the gall, Mr. Speaker, to stand up in this House and suggest that we are being secretive or that information is not being shared with them. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, what has this government done? We have created NSICOP that specifically allows parliamentarians and senators to review highly classified information. We've passed the Election Modernization Act to help tackle foreign interference, which Conservatives voted against, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-76. We created the panel of experts to monitor during an election real-time what was going on in terms of foreign interference and given them the ability and the powers to act on it. We've put in tighter controls on advertising and online platforms. We've closed fundraising loopholes to keep foreign money out of elections. We've enhanced the integrity of the voters list. We've now, as a result of concerns, real concerns that Canadians have, and rightfully so, election foreign interference is something that's been going on for about 10 years now. At least it's been talked about a lot more in the mainstream, as we've seen in other countries. The Prime Minister, and indeed this side of the House, is seized with what's going on. Mr. Speaker, we take this very seriously. That's why the Prime Minister empowered NSICOP and NSIRA to specifically look into the issue of foreign interference, and why the Prime Minister has appointed an incredible Canadian, David Johnston, to look at the issue and to recommend back to the Prime Minister the best course of action to move forward, which very well might be a public inquiry. And this government has already said, in advance of knowing what any of those recommendations might be, that we will accept those recommendations and implement them. So, for the previous member, the member from Thornhill, to come in here and suggest that this government has done absolutely nothing about foreign interference and has been secretive is just completely untrue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will say that I find it very interesting that we're getting this lecture from the member from Carleton, Leader of the Opposition, and his MPs about sending staff to committee. It was the member from Carleton, and I'll read it out again because I think it is just so telling, who in 2010 said, and I quote, he said this on CBC, the video is widely available for anybody to go back and review. He said, ministers answer questions on behalf of the government and not staff. We're not going to be changing 300 years of history all of a sudden at the behest of the coalition parties. We're not going to have staff members appearing in question period to answer on behalf of the government. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way, the way it's always been done right up until the last several months. And we're going to keep the ministers, the guys in charge. I always get a kick out of course, using that terminology, the guys in charge. Of course, the member from Carleton would phrase it like that. We're going to keep the guys in charge responsible for their duties. End quote. This was the member from Carleton when he was in government. And he was answering a question as to whether or not staff, in particular Dimitri Soudis, would go to committee, the Prime Minister's Director of Communications. I think that the hypocrisy here is literally oozing out of that side of the House and dribbling down towards the aisle here, Mr. Speaker, when I listen to what is coming from that side of the House. But get this. After the NDP at the time were able to get through a motion to require Mr. Soudis to appear before committee, I believe with other political parties, Mr. Soudis never even appeared before committee. You know who appeared? Stephen Harper sent John Baird, one of his ministers at the time, to deal with the situation. And here's what Mr. Baird said in response to Mr. Easter asking him, why are you here and not the person we called to be here? Mr. Baird said, quote, "The government believes the opposition is playing politics with parliamentary committees and is not respecting due process and fair play." Sound familiar, Mr. Speaker? They are conducting random interrogations without due process or any rules of fairness. That might be how things work in the United States Congress, but it's not the Canadian tradition. In Canada, the constitutional principle of ministerial responsibility prevails. End quote. That is what John Baird said when Stephen Harper defied the requirement or the request of Parliament for Dimitri Soudis, the Director of Communications in the Prime Minister's office, to appear before committee. So for this newfound approach from the Conservatives to suddenly be able to be so incredibly hypocritical, and I won't even hold it against the new members who've come along since 2015, but in particular the member from Carleton, who wasn't just an MP that happened to be around the House at the time, he was actually leading the file. And now suddenly he's standing here saying, oh no, it's completely appropriate now. And I asked the member from Thornhill just before my speech, why is it okay now? And she was totally not able to give an answer. You know what her answer basically was? Well, the chiefs of staff have already come forward from this government. Oh, I see. So what you're basically saying is we should have never set the precedent, because now you're running rampant all over it, using every possible opportunity. Where does it end from here, Mr. Speaker? That's the question. Every time they want to drum up a fake scandal, they're going to run in here and use the same language that they're using now. No one, Mr. Speaker, is doing China's work better for them than the Conservative MPs right now, who are sowing the seeds of distrust in our democratic institutions. Right. That's what's happening right now, and it's Conservative MPs' responsibility for all of it. This comes down to politics, Mr. Speaker. This comes down to politics. It comes down to, you know, and I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm not the only one saying that this is just politically motivated. Just push aside, Mr. Speaker, all the people who are Liberal and NDP, nonpartisan, push them aside for a second. Let's just talk about Conservatives who are calling out this rhetoric. We have Fred Delory, the campaign manager from a year and a half ago, who's nightly, it's like he's lining up to get on every talk show or every panel he can, CTV, CBC, he's everywhere right now, basically saying that the Conservatives are just trying to score political points. We have Vern White, former Conservative senator, who has referred to what's going on as BS. That's what he actually said, Mr. Speaker. He's a former Conservative senator because at some point he came to the realization that this political party is way farther to the right than where they had been when he was appointed a senator, if you can believe that. Former Senator Hugh Segal, who represented my area, who I have an incredible amount of respect for, has also, You have no, like, listen to them heckle, Mr. Speaker. They have no idea of the incredible things that Hugh Segal has done just for our area. A great champion of income, of basic income guarantee. You know, he referred to what they're doing as the Chicken Little nature of the opposition. This is a Conservative. You know, it goes on. And then, of course, there's a most recent comment by the member from Carleton himself, which I found very telling and just highlighted the politics of this, Mr. Speaker. When the member from Carleton, the leader of the opposition, said he didn't want a briefing. If he was offered a briefing, would he take that briefing on what was going on? And he said, no, I won't do that because that means that it would be illegal for me to speak out. So what you basically got is you got the leader of the opposition who's saying, I don't want to know the information because even though that might be helpful to Canada, I'd rather be oblivious so that I can continue scoring political points. It works a lot better in my fundraising emails that I blast out every day, and that's what he would much rather do. So, Mr. Speaker, this really does fall in the hands of the NDP. The NDP get to decide what happens here. Do we keep playing political theater, which is exactly what China wants, or do we actually look into this in a meaningful way that can get answers for Canadians and that can get Canadians' confidence in the system, in particular, the strong fundamental institution of democracy that we have here? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.